The Animal Rights Show. We're in a bit of chaos this week. We've got to admit we've had a bit of a technical issue, so bear with us. But we've got all your favourites coming up. So we've got the news item coming up in a few minutes, and then we've got the objection, and then as a special right at the end, after Mel's appearance, which went down very well, he very kindly put together another film about the Hunt Sabs, but this one is kind of more positive because I realized that the one that I made was rather negative. Everyone's going, it's just dreary, but so we've got a balance for that. And then what we're going to do is stick them together and publish it as a kind of whole thing on the internet. So we're going to begin with what day is it, folks?
World Vegan Day.
World Vegan Day.
So happy World Vegan Day. And so as a treat for myself, I reconnected with Louise Wallis, and I'm going to just show you a little clip of an interview that I did with her early today, as we broadcasters say, and then what I'll do is I'll post the full thing on my channel as well, because it went a little bit longer than it should have done. That was my fault. Sorry about that. And so I'll just show you a little bit of this. Louise Wallis, her claim to fame is in trying to work out my screens here. Louise Wallis, her claim to fame is 1994. She founded World Vegan Day, and so we talk about that, and then we talk about this little bit that I'm going to show you right now. So here we go. Kind of why to this. So this is the there we go. This is the still there, the World Vegan Day on the Vegan Society. So what was the motivation then, Louise?
Well, really, it's because I suppose up until that point in within the vegan community, really a lot of the focus had been more on being anti, vivisection, anti-meat, anti-dairy, and the word vegan itself, I really like because it's a positive word. It's not like very anti-racist. It's a positive word. So rather than being anti something, you're actually for something, which is kindness. And so World Vegan Day seemed like a opportunity to focus more on the positive, to celebrate veganism, for itself.
So there we go. So let me stop sharing that. Yeah, so that's Louise Wallis. As I said, the full interview will be on my channel later on, and it is quite interesting. And I do make the quip that, for you new vegans out there, be careful, because we are going to talk about the 1990s, and veganism did actually exist back then. So that was, I'm just cueing you into the joke that I made. So happy World Vegan Day. We're gonna move on to the news. Is that right, Jeremy?
Well, yeah. So that was the 50th anniversary. That was kind of what kicked it off.
Yeah. Louise Wallis was the chair of the Vegan Society at the time, and so she says in the interview that she wanted to do something that. See, the thing is, things were a bit different in those days. In terms of, there wasn't much vegan campaigning in those days. In fact, there was hardly any. And so really, when you think about it, it was a way of getting people to focus on vegan education, veganism as the issue, rather than all the single issues. And so it's a kind of different mindset, because at the end of the interview, I say, is the day still relevant, in the sense that we're all kind of doing vegan outreach now, but it wasn't the case then. And she kind of kick-started that, I suppose, to some extent, by trying to get people to at least focus on veganism for one day. I mean, it sounds ludicrous nowadays, I know. And then the idea of World Vegan Month came into being as well.
Yeah, so it probably played a pretty pivotal role to getting people to ripen up to the word vegan, because vegetarian was still probably used quite frequently when people really meant vegan. Would that be fair?
I think so, yeah. And also, I mean, this was the time, we talk about mid-90s, this was the time when vegan outreach was starting in North America. So this is really the birth of what we now call vegan education, and in Francione's terms, the kind of veganism moral baseline type idea. And until then, really, nobody in the animal rights movement focused on veganism, which I know for a 21st century audience sounds really weird, but it's also true.
Yeah. Well, with that, hello to Elliot, Deb, Jennifer, Kristen, and Terry. Thank you for joining us again. Yeah, should we see what's happening in the world of animal rights this week? If I can make it happen. Here we are. It's time for the news of the week.
I'm so excited. Big Red. Oh.
So, the news of the week. The European Parliament has rejected bullfighting. In a vote on Wednesday, the Parliament decided that the Common Agricultural Policy should not subsidize cattle farms where other animals are bred for bullfights. The amendment was approved by 335 votes in favor, 297 against, and 60 abstentions, thanks mainly to the European left. It remains to be seen if the amendment will be fulfilled in practice. This depends on negotiation that the European Parliament will hold with the European Council and the European Commission. The Spanish government is expected to do everything possible to circumvent this decision, and the Bullfighters Association has already announced that it intends to take the matter to the European Court of Justice. On other subsidies-related news, the Greek government announced a €3 million financial help to the fur industry, although the breeding of animals for their fur is banned in most European countries, and 90% of the Greek population are against fur. After strong reactions from the activist community, the government agreed to further examine the issue. Back to studio.
This has been the news of the week.
Let's just move on, shall we? Can we please move on, Reba?
I'm liking that back to studio thing.
Studio, yeah.
Becoming a tradition, isn't it?
Yeah, that's not mine.
We're back in the room. Jeremy, you're going to have to get a nothing could go wrong clip, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll tell you what, actually, I'll tell you one question that I want to ask. It said about the EU cancels the subsidies, right? Whereas, I mean, like, Ireland is part of the EU, and yet it's the Irish government that gives the subsidies to the greyhound racing industry. I mean, they give something like 16.5 million euros per year to the greyhound racing industry. It's interesting that this is like a European subsidy rather than country by country thing. I don't know whether you're able to answer that kind of anomaly, because I don't know whether. See, I'm wondering whether the Irish subsidy is actually through the EU as well. I don't know.
From what I've read, there are two kinds of subsidies. And for example, Greece has national subsidies, if I can call it that, and then European subsidies for fur. So fur farmers get two different kinds of subsidies.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, but you see, the thing is, I think a lot of vegan groups and vegans are trying to turn their attention towards the issue of subsidies. And obviously, one way to bring about plant-based eating would be to create the subsidies that's going to get people out of animal agriculture into arable and everything. And so it'd be interesting to find out how it works, because I'm sure it's a very complicated system, the subsidy thing. And I certainly don't know how it works, and I don't know anybody that does. So.
I'd love to know how they did it. I'd love to know how they did it, because one of the articles I read on it said that some of the leading Spanish politicians had family members that themselves were involved in the so-called bullfighting, or forcing cows to fight each other to the fight to the death type thing. Because even the language bullfighting, have to pick that apart a little bit, because it implies their purpose is to fight kind of thing. Yeah. Well, what do we think about subsidies? Do we think it's an untapped area here, or do we think it's the magic green bullet that can really accelerate things? I mean, I think this is an example of a success, which I'm kind of I'm curious how we could make those kinds of successes in the more wider forms of animal use. I'm not sure how we get to that point.
I think it's important to talk about subsidies because most of the citizens don't know where their money goes, their tax money. So when they realize that this money goes to breeding other animals, most of the time don't like it. They would prefer this money to go to health or education or somewhere else. So it's an important way to gain allies. And if we could manage to use these campaigns also as outreach events, I think that this would be great. I mean, use single-issue campaigns, because I believe subsidies require single-issue campaigns, and use these events as outreach events too. It would be powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, because I guess like you say, it also brings up the issue of single issues. If people are opposed to cows being forced to, fight, can we bridge that to other conversations, like you say, at outreach events, and a point that has come up on the show a lot in the past is the whole disruption of cultural speciesism, because that was a long, we had a long discussion with someone quite cranky on the show a while back, didn't you, Roger? I think you might have had a bit of a back and forth from memory.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing that came from Nella's report there is that the bullfighters are going to repeal the thing, and that's what the fur farmers did in relation to, they got compensation from the British government. And I think they were originally offered something like 8 million British pounds between them, and I think there was quite a few of them at the time. And so they went to the European Court of Human Rights, which is so ironic from our point of view, that somebody goes to the European Court of Human Rights in order to carry on violation of the rights of other animals. But nevertheless, that's what they did, and their compensation was indeed increased. And I think that they got about 20 million between them. And I know that one of them was called Cobbledick. He said that he was able to use the compensation set up in Europe. And now, because, as Nella said, they're being chased out of Europe, it'll probably got another block of compensation now, and then the mink will be probably moved to China. So it's a bit like a chess game at the moment. There's all these bans, and then the mink and the money just moves elsewhere.
And what's really interesting with this as well, talking about advocating, against subsidies for things like fur farming. I don't even like calling it fur farming. Is that it's seen as the majority of EU citizens actually oppose fur production, and actually many member states have already banned it or are in the process of banning it. And there was some research conducted by Metron Analysis, and it was financed by Fur Free Alliance, but it showed that about 8 out of 10 citizens, about 83% actually oppose the breeding and killing of animals for the commercial exploitation of fur. So with that in mind, it does sort of beg the question, what will it take if so many actual citizens are against this, but they're still receiving massive subsidies? What will it take to get these subsidies stopped? And does it mean that we do need more of a kind of a political arm of campaigning for these kind of things? But then that brings us back to what Jeremy just was mentioning there, that cultural speciesism, because whatever political campaigns are going on, because we are in such a paradigm, we're limited by that ingrained cultural speciesism and systemic oppression of other animals. Usually these kind of political campaigns are confined within that welfarist paradigm. And so how, it's just kind of complex, isn't it? How can we better campaign in a rights-based way when we're so confined by that cultural speciesism and that welfarist, kind of paradigm that we're kind of stuck in?
I'll tell you what it does raise, obviously the same point can be made about the numbers of people who are opposed to blood sports, and yet the blood sports legislation is not so good. And it's full of loopholes, as we know, and as Mel attested to last week. But it also, from a rights point of view, it's interesting, because we always think, well, we campaign and we advocate for moral rights for other animals, and then eventually, when there's a big adherence to that, then those are going to be codified into law and become legal rights. But we see that if the opposition, as it were, is strong enough and they're wealthy enough, then the politicians will be really slow to do that, even though that would be the ideal type. That we've won the argument, in the sense that the argument against blood sports has been won, you could argue, but it's still not been codified into law in the way that the advocates and the public would want it. In other words, to stop it, because it's not been stopped, it's just been altered.
Kind of a case against focusing on system change in a way and focusing back on the demand, although I guess every form of animal use is a bit different in that regard. And hello, everyone who's also joined us. Lowrod, Digital Bloodbath, O'Neill, and Digital Bloodbath has just shared that there's a mink farm just near them. So, right, I think when these, obviously, we all know these things exist, but I think when they're in our own backyard, it makes it a bit more visceral.
Digital Bloodbath, that's a name and a half, isn't it?
Yeah, I like that one. Yeah, I think, well, and also because the single issue thing is interesting to me because I don't know, I guess when we're talking about the so-called bullfighting, I mean, that doesn't, I mean, presumably it's not going to be shifted around like the so-called fur trade. So that's one maybe, so maybe it's a slightly different tactic that could be used in that arena.
Oh, yeah, I think that's different. And also, you know, this campaign on the subsidies level, I think it's the kind of probably the only type of political campaigning that I would support at this given time. And going back to what you said, Jeremy, it's because it's kind of like the one needs to follow the other. And so we need to have quite substantial cultural change before we go to politics. But that might not be the case with subsidies, especially because the environmental angle is so prominent at the moment. And so obviously we would still want to try to maintain the animal ethics part of it, but the subsidies are probably going to have to change real quick because of the fact that, you know, we've just got such a climate crisis and the farmers are going to resist it. But it's a question of how long can they before they're going to, you know, have to change.
Yeah, it seems like at a minimum we just need an even playing field. Because, I mean, Wendy, that stat you quoted is quite disturbing, isn't it? Because you think that we get public support. You know, we all talk as a movement a lot about critical mass. When it comes, I think what that goes to say is system change, whether it be legal or, you know, whatever, it's a lot, you know, it takes quite a long time. You know, it's first political support and then have to then gradually work our way into the political system, which...
Yeah.
Well, it is interesting, isn't it? Often people who are in favour of system change or structural change are kind of going, well, you know, we don't have time to talk to one person at a time, one plate at a time, this kind of stuff, as though system change is quick, because it's not.
Yeah. And that's the key for me with the subsidy thing. I think we should definitely have it on our radar. I'm just not sure how exactly that factors in. I think a topic that's been brought up on the show in the past by Declan and others is actually just building awareness with the public about it. Because I think, like it has been discussed, most of the public doesn't know about these subsidies. You know, at least have an even playing field. You know, if they keep, and especially the bailouts, you know, in the current year of 2020, I mean, I think a lot of our countries are going back into lockdown as we speak. So these are going to become more and more relevant.
Do you think that's true, though? Do you think it's true that people don't know that farming, for example, is subsidized? Do you think that's true?
Especially from a non-vegan perspective, absolutely. Yeah. And from a vegan perspective, hopefully we're not contributing into it too much through our individual choices, through who we vote for and, you know, consumers and all that, assuming that's where our focus should be in the first place. But I mean, you know, it's interesting. What does everybody think? Do non-vegans know about it? I mean, I wouldn't.
I think they don't. They don't. No.
I don't think
you're outvoted 3-1, Roger.
I don't think people think about things like that. And actually, isn't it very disconcerting, as a vegan, even with that awareness and having that kind of knowledge, when you start to learn where your taxpayers' money is actually going, into vivisection, into subsidies for everything you stand against, and yet you have no choice, and it just feels so. You feel really powerless in that way. But I've got a little bit of a question that might be controversial, perhaps.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm waiting for. You might have to get the head exploding icon for Roger.
Is it the M word or the C word or which?
It might be the C word. So what was regarding the bulls who are forced to fight? So with this kind of potential win that we might have here with this stopping of the subsidies, when I've kind of been reading up on this, there's a lot of talk from the organizations that have been campaigning against it, like the Dutch and Spanish welfare parties, and then more recently the Portuguese Animal Welfare Party. I can see we're just getting ready here. There's been a lot of talk about, you know, that they've been increasing public pity for these other animals. And that just kind of got me to thinking and raising this controversial question. You know, there's been a lot of, in the campaign, there's been a lot of talk, of course, of cruelty, torture and abuse of these other animals. But then my question is, when something is so violent like this, can this language actually be justified in these campaigns? And of course, we would want to frame it in a rights way, but can we justify using this kind of language? Because when you see these images of the bullfighting, it's beyond belief, isn't it? And this is my question.
I think we've been having some internal dialogue, haven't we, around the kind of emotional connection? So I think there's definitely a strong case. I mean, the whole Reagan quote, you know, that philosophy is the information, but, you know, the emotion is kind of what makes us drink the information. And yeah, so I think there has to be an emotional component, but I think we'll all agree here at least, and hopefully a lot of viewers too, that our language is profoundly important. So yeah, so I think when we use a word like pity, that doesn't exactly evoke justice or an individual's right to be, you know, respected. Would you prefer, what do you think, Roger? You prefer mercy? Show them mercy.
I'm not answering that. Interesting though. Jennifer says, no, I doubt they know. I was looking for the people in the chat to back me up, and they've all let me down so far.
Well, and Chris too.
And
I think Chris seems to echo that. And specifically, this is a really interesting story that Chris has shared, is around how there's a 50% increase in Greece, and that you know, half a decade ago, and look at that expansion rate. So it's not just keeping them going, but it's actually helping them to grow, which is
well, that could be part. You know, you remember when I had my kind of debate, as it were, with Cranky, things have changed. The governments realised that they were going to be really stung by the compensation thing. The British court lost in the European Court of Human Rights, as I said. When I was looking at what was going on in Ireland, the highest figure I saw was somewhere like 60 million euros to go to the fur farmers, because there was 5 at the time. And so the governments then thought, well, rather than paying them this big lump sum, which is not going to look good on the books, presumably, they would just leave them to stay open for another decade or so. But presumably during that decade, they're then eligible for subsidies. And so I think that's what's going on there.
Well, and you do have a bit of pity in the chat from my mom has said, sorry, Roger. So you may not get the support, but you're at least getting pity.
Can someone please have mercy on Roger and back him up?
And Tone says that pig has poo on his head. This is Gary, folks. And we've never worked out why this pig has got poo on his head.
I'm sure it's mud. I'm sure it's mud.
Oh, I'm
cooling off because it's a natural sunscreen for them. They use it to cool off on hot days. It's quite sensible, really.
Well, why didn't you say this in our private chats then, rather than going, I don't know what it was all about? What do you think, Gary? Yeah, me too.
Just so everyone knows, Gary is a regular on our team meetings. He's a regular contributor.
Has a lot to say.
He does have a lot
Quite
to say.
spirited.
Yeah.
He's a feisty one.
He likes to say, shut up, wake up, and go vegan. Or words to that effect.
Yeah, you might have even left that word or two. Well, with that, should we go to the objection of the week? May as well. It's time for the objection of the week. Yes.
I could never go vegan. I like my meat.
Yeah, well, quite a lot of people like their meat, and some people even say that they love their meat. But, you know, most people also say that they love animals. I mean, we're all animal lovers. I am, and I'm sure you are. And so there's so much cruelty in meat. That's the problem. So much abuse. And so if you love animals, then you've got to think about not eating this product of abuse.
Yes, but it's just the way it is. I mean, we're not eating all animals.
Well, you're eating all of the ones that are killed, but the point is, it's for a nation of animal lovers, for example, we shouldn't be eating any animals. We should be showing them mercy, and we've got to end the worst forms of animal abuse, and we've got to love them, because that's what it's all about. We're animal lovers, and so we should do that. We express that by going vegan.
Then we should move to more humane ways of animal farming.
No, humane farming is a myth. It's all cruel. There's so much cruelty.
You see? I could never go vegan. I love my meat.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. And there are a lot of vegans who used to love their meat as well. But do you think that loving something justifies doing it if it's morally wrong? What would you say to that?
But, how can it be morally wrong when everybody does it?
Is everyone doing something justification for us doing it? I mean, would you say that what you're eating comes from the bodies of individuals? Would you say that they are individuals before they're killed?
Obviously they are. They are just like dogs and cats. They are animals.
Yeah. Do you think that perhaps their lives would matter to them? So, the cows and the pigs, the sheep and the chickens, do you think their lives before they're killed, their lives matter?
To them, yes, of course.
To them. So if their lives matter to them and they're individuals in the same way that humans are, then would you not say that we should respect those rights? Their rights to live their own lives?
We should, but I'm just one person. I cannot change the world.
Well, the world is made up of just, a few billion single people. So we can all change ourselves, and it's the changing ourselves that will eventually lead to changing the world. We can only control what we do, but I think that's really important that we do that we look to our own moral values and come into alignment with those.
So you're saying that we should give other animals rights?
No, I believe that the other animals already have rights. They have rights that not to be bred, not to be used, not to be killed for human gain, for human benefit, but that we just need to start acknowledging and accepting these rights and respecting them.
I see.
This has been the Objection of the Week.
That explains a lot.
I'm still reeling from hearing Roger talking about 40. I'm literally like, post coming out in a sweat.
Yeah, well, just cup a lot of this. I had to make notes.
It's a good thing I have this overlay. Someone's gonna take a cut of that clip, take away the overlays, and I'm sure play it back for you.
I love my meat.
Well, I'm so unused to saying these words.
Yeah, so just to provide a bit more backstory, the whole idea behind the objection is to contrast the common response that I myself used when I first started advocating with a rights-based approach. And obviously, I mean, Roger shared his list of words there, but I thought it was interesting also because one of the big things that a lot of campaigns hit on is love and being a nation of animal lovers. And, I think we're really selling ourselves short if we set that as a barrier, because if someone doesn't have any relations with other animals, to expect them to love them to go vegan is, to me, it's about respect. So that's, to me, where the claims making should really be tethered to.
Yeah. And I don't think that any social movement is about love. They're all about justice. So why is this one different?
Yeah, I always say the other animals don't need our love, they need our respect. And then we've got to work out what being respectful towards them means and how that works. And from an animal rights point of view, it means that we recognize them as rights holders and we recognize that by using them, that's a rights violation. And that means that because they're rights holders, that creates rights in them, which creates duties in us. And the duties in us is to respect them. And even though, you know, the obvious answer to that is, well, they don't respect us. Well, there's quite a few humans that don't do that too, but we don't exclude them from the moral community. And so that's the animal rights case, really, that we include those who don't reciprocate. Because obviously the ideal type of a rights-based society would be one in which every single individual would have rights, and they would perform duties, so rights and obligations. It's usually framed as. But there are some people who don't understand obligations, and obviously we think about people at the very beginning of their life and quite often at the very end of their life, but they still are seen to have rights, even though at the beginning and the end, it's a limited situation. But then again, animal rights is a limited situation. You know, a lot of people don't quite understand that animal rights is a modest idea. It's a very modest idea. And obviously, it's got massive ramifications, but the actual idea is quite modest.
Yeah, it's really interesting the whole love thing, because I think where that tends to come from when I kind of question this is because I think a lot
love them,
is that, and I speak for myself here, is that I first I always had an affinity and a connection to other animals from being young, and I think I just had I do have a real love for them, and I think from that as my awareness has grown and as I've really become involved in the movement, then I've learned how to respect and to look for justice. Whereas I think for me, it started from love. And I think that's probably where maybe a lot of advocates start from, is a connection and a love. So they kind of then try to then maybe project that out in order, I want you to feel like I do. Whereas I suppose for some people that might work and for some it won't. I suppose it's like you're saying, it's about respect. You might not love your neighbor, but you'll respect them because it's, you know, it's the way we are. We have moral and ethical duties, and to, you know, respect their rights to whatever. You don't have to love them. But I think it's an interesting topic, because I think from empathy you can grow respect, because you can get into someone else's world and think, well, I wouldn't want this done to me, and therefore I shouldn't be doing it to them. And it is, so I think more than love, maybe empathy is probably quite a strong something we could advocate for, but not in terms of, oh, we want you to pity and empathize, and in that way it's more empathy to grow respect. So I agree with the respect and justice thing as well.
Yeah, because I think it can be part of the discussion. I mean, one of the things I find quite powerful on street outreach, that thing I used to do in 2019, is someone's talking about their family members of another species, dogs, cats, and so on, and they all, you know, I love how my dog does da 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 da, you know, my dog, but you know, I think we can build off that. It just doesn't necessarily need to be the sole claims making. But here, back to what you're saying, Wendy. I mean, do you think respect is a necessary component to then love someone, or do you think they can come at different times? You know what I mean? Like, do you think, do you see it as like a love then respect? Because I would think, I mean, maybe it's just a mindset thing.
I've been really thinking about this, because I think some people have, they love in a way that they want to control, which I think is some people who love in the way that they show respect. Because I think some people will say, even when you see people out with with animal companions, and they, oh, I love my dog, but really they have this desire to completely dominate and control. But they would say that they love them, whereas the love I feel is like, I love them so much that I feel I want them to be their own people, like in a way that I have as little control as I possibly can. And so I think maybe there's a difference between love and control and love and respect. Maybe it's like a nuance thing. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. Well, I think just being a bit dynamic. I mean, because all our audience is all different, aren't they? So you know, obviously we want to have some sole claims making, but especially on one-on-one interactions, really figuring out what relates to them. So being a bit fluid with it, with our language too. You know, if we're saying a word that they don't really understand, actually trying something else, or maybe combining it with other words.
Yeah.
I'd like to say a couple of things about what Kristen Hess has said. The two comments there.
Gonna pick on my mom.
Yeah. Before we do that, digital bloodbath has mentioned the pronouns, and so yeah. So thanks that you recognise that, and also that goes back to our Zoom days really, when we used to have all the audience on the screen, and it was just a respectful thing to do. And Animal Resistance University used to insist on it as well. And a lot of people don't quite get why it's so important, but it really is, you know, within the trans community to do that. Just so you see that and you think, okay, now I can adapt my language, and so that means that my language won't be hurtful, because again, some people don't kind of understand how important that is, but it really is. The pronoun thing is important.
And again, it comes down to respect, doesn't it? It's total
another respect thing.
You're not loving the person to do that. You're just respecting them.
Respecting every individual for who they are. Yeah.
Yeah,
totally.
it's a simple thing. It's one of the simplest things to do, isn't it? And like you say, it means a lot to to the community. Here's an interesting comment actually around the raising animals humanely. Would you eat them? And I think that's an interesting underscores the difference between a common response to what we're talking about for the objection versus a rights-based response, because it's not necessarily about the treatment or how they're used. It's the fact that they're bred, used, and killed in the first place, and that their rights are going to be violated regardless of how it's done. So rather than getting in, I think on outreach, what I try to do is rather than get into a discussion of, well, how would we do it humanely? Because I think we go down that road if we start asking those types of questions, even though they're meant to get people to think about, you know, what does humanely really mean and all that. I think it can narrow in the conversation, I think, on treatment. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add on that.
Thing is on that though, Jeremy, is how would the Joey Carbstrongs and the Earthling Eds of the world answer that? They'd answer by saying there's no such thing as humanely, right? But then the kind of, if you like, the philosophical kind of mind game would be, well, what if there was, that we could get a criteria, you know, and obviously the welfares would say, in the same way as, you know, Peter Singer would say, it could be done humanely, you can kill them without them knowing, and they're replaceable anyway, and so blah blah and all that kind of stuff. So this is where the welfare rights thing really kind of shows itself in a way, because from a rights point of view, it would still be a rights violation. But if it was true that you could raise them humanely by some criteria that was generally agreed on, what would the animal advocates do then that would talk about cruelty and all that all the time?
Exactly. It leaves you nowhere to go, doesn't it? If you get to this perfect, I know we've spoken about this before, if you get to this perfect world where they're, you know, other animals are killed and they don't know about it and they've had this idyllic life, and then you go, okay, well, this is still not good enough. Where do you go from there? It's, you know, you've got this humane killing and this amazing welfare and no cruelties going on, no abuse, no torture. It's all just beautiful. However, they're still being raised and killed for our benefit. And I love what Jeremy always says about do the flip it to test it. Like, would you do it with a human? And if you wouldn't, then the answer is hell no.
I think this...
Have you got a T-shirt that says that, Jeremy?
Probably. Got a T-shirt for everything these days. Yeah. So, hello to my mom, who's a great supporter of the show, and
Hi, Kristen.
Hello.
But yeah, I think this is a really strong point from my mom here, that when someone talks about loving animals, the question is, you know, well, do you eat them? Because I think it does show a bit of that potential cognitive dissonance. It's not always that framed in that way. The thing I like to do is tacking on use, so eat or use them, which I appreciate depending on the context. May be different, but I guess I'd want to distance myself from a vegetarian message, which if we focus solely on the eating, I think that's what we might be doing. But yeah, I think with that...
We're saying it's cognitive dissonance. Why? I mean, we're imposing that concept on this. If you go back to the point just before that one, the first one.
My mom's?
Yeah.
This one?
The one. That's it, yeah. You know, love them or eat them. The culture is all about loving them and eating them. And from the cultural point of view, there's no contradiction there. And so we rely on people going, oh, I never thought of it that way. But the culture thinks of it that way, in the sense that there's a categories game going on for a start. There is food animals versus, say, pets or animal companions, whatever you want to say. But, you know, the animal companions, the form of animal use that we impose on them is that we pet them. That's what we use them for. In terms of food animals, we use them as food, as if they're food. And so from the culture's point of view, there is no contradiction to do the same. And then there's also this interesting thing I think we've talked about as a team, which is that, you know, you see video after video of chicks or piglets, you know, and saying, well, you know, surely you couldn't eat this little baby. Well, they don't eat those little babies. They wait for them to grow up until they're not looking all cute and bouncy and all the rest of it, you know. And so why not? They think, well, you know, I'll have my cake and eat it, thanks. It's a win-win for me. I'll join in with you cooing over the piglet and think it's great to see them running around with a ball. At the same time, when they grow up, I'll eat them. That's the culture. That's the culture of speciesism that says that we can do the same.
Which we're not disrupting when our primary claims making is love, is it?
Yeah.
We're just reinforcing the culture in a way. I mean, I appreciate we're trying to highlight the distinction, you know.
Yeah, you hear farmers saying all the time how much they love their animals, don't you? You hear that all the time. I had a point to make then, and it's completely gone.
And also, this is the answer you get from people in the street when you ask them what's the difference between their dog anyway, and the pig, and they cannot really say something solid about it, but they feel that these are two completely different animals with different rights, even if they cannot give a reasonable explanation for that.
I've just remembered my point. Well, I better say it quick before it goes again. It was to do with when people see an individual other animal rather than seeing them as a mass or a group, because you know you get those incidents where you might get a cow, a sheep, a pig who will somehow escape from a truck en route or something like that, and the public will be all behind them and say, oh wow, let's save you know, Rocky or whatever, and let's save Rocky and let's get behind this and let's get Rocky to a sanctuary. And they would be all behind that because they've seen an individual story and this individual trying to escape, and they've connected with an individual, not as part of that mass of like just, you know, cows that they don't even see or visualize or want to think about. I think that's the difference as well. There's a real disconnect when it's a group or a mass over a certain number. Humans connect.
Reagan said, if I knew you, I wouldn't eat you. You know, that attitude.
Yeah, well, and I think that going back to the role play, that's one thing I really liked. And just to clarify, we're all vegan here, but you know, taking those roles, I really liked how Wendy focused on the individual, which I think regardless of the language we use, that focus is really key. And I do think it helps to address some of these
yeah, Wendy, you were so convincing the other week. I don't think it was last week, maybe the week before, that somebody wrote in and said that you weren't vegan.
Oh, no.
So just to straighten things out, how many years has it been? Yeah, I think you've got your badge.
I was defending animal testing as well, which, like, if anyone thought that of me, I would literally. Honestly.
You have a sign. I don't really mean this.
So we've updated the overlays to hopefully avoid confusion. But well, I think Deb's just raised a really good point around the difference between that love versus respect argument framing. You know, which we've kind of been hitting on as well. That you know, you don't have to love other human beings to respect them.
Do you love humans before you have to donate to Live Aid? I mean, it's ridiculous.
Back in the 80s.
I didn't say it.
Well, we have a hypothetical question here from Human Low Solidarity. If a saber-toothed tiger ate your friend, would you take revenge and kill and eat it? Or I'd probably say them, because they're an individual versus, you know, an animate object. But yeah,
I believe I would
Roger,
then.
I think.
Well, the right space response to that is, first of all, not to call them it, but also this is where the distinction between moral agent and moral patient comes in a sense that if a saber-toothed tiger ate a human being, they're just getting their dinner, and there's and so you then have to regard them as a moral patient, and in that sense, there's no kind of ill intent or anything like that. And so, no, you don't take revenge because there's no point because in that sense they haven't understood morally what they've done. They've just had their dinner. That's all. And the fact is, your friend was their dinner that particular day. That's all it was.
Because you made a strong point the other day, didn't you? Just one moment, Wendy. Is
me make a strong point?
The collective versus the individual?
What was it?
Because the saber-toothed tiger being extinct, because saber-toothed, I assume we're referring to the prehistoric version. From a conservation perspective, they're the last individual of their kind, presumably. So, they would hold more value. But from a rights-based perspective, what's the line you said, Roger? That even if they're the last rhino on Earth, or pick your species, it's that's
that was
the same to them as an
thing.
individual.
Yeah, there was a famous book. I think it's called The Extended Circle or something like that, and it's by John Wynne Tyson. And Ronnie Lee was quoted in it. I think it came out in the 80s, and Ronnie is quoted by saying that the last whale on Earth wouldn't care that they were the last whale on Earth. They would care if they had a harpoon stuck into them. And we were talking about the difference between a rights-based position and a conservation position, because that would be a tragedy for a conservationist. But all of them are tragedies from a rights point of view, whether there's 4 million of them or whether there's one. That's a rights violation. So that's the difference there. And that's often why there's tension often between a rights-based position and conservation, so it's the individual versus the species, essentially.
Yeah, and Digital Bubbleth has said, just clarifying, the love is really focused on the animal companions, so it is kind of species specific. So maybe that's a part of the distinction to kind of understanding there.
Yeah, but the interesting thing about that is, where does that fit in relation to people love to go to those little, what they call the pet farms, petting farms, right? People love to do that. And they often love to interact with piglets and rabbits and all that. So I've never been totally convinced about that. Although you do answer it by the categories that we teach our kids. I mean, I've got a video about this, about how everybody is taught to be, all the other animals are almost like on the same kind of level. They're all friends to little kids, and then eventually the parents kind of say, well, actually, there's some of them that we eat, and there's some of them that we want to kill because they're vermin and all that kind of stuff. And so there's like a 2-tier value system that we have to teach our kids. It's quite interesting, but also complicated.
And Elle is just echoing some of our sentiment around language. The whole going back to the objection, I love my meat. The my implies that ownership or control or property or possession, which is from a rights-based perspective, other animals aren't property, they're individuals. Which there's loads to unpack from that, but also the whole I love my meat implies the whole taste, presumably, is what they love about, but the euphemism meat is something to call out. But also,
I remember a big debate within the anarchist community about whether you should say things like, I'll just go get my coat, rather than I'll just go and get that coat.
So you can never leave, right? You're having these discussions till 3 a.m. when you meant to leave at 8 o'clock.
Well, it's all about, why do anarchists drink chamomile tea? Because property is theft. And so the idea was that you don't actually identify anything as your property. My coat, that coat. Yeah.
There is a people
when it comes
somewhere
to
sorry, Jeremy, didn't realize you didn't finish. There is a people somewhere, and I can't remember where it is, but where in the world these people are, but they don't have a word for my or property. I can't remember where that is. We'll have to look that up. But that I find that really interesting, because everything we talk about my and our, and it's property and belonging, isn't it?
What happens when they get shocked? How do they go, oh my? Sorry, everyone.
Oh, I think I have something for you there.
I was hoping for the trombone one.
We'll work up to that one, I guess. Yeah, hard to follow up with that. But yeah, I think the other thing around the whole objection of the week, I love my meat, is it also leads to the common movement claim. Do you value taste over life? Which I think on the surface has, some efficacy to it. However, it is implying that we can't enjoy the taste of animal-free foods, which I think there's other things I think we can unpack from that, but I've moved away from that comparison because we're not comparing the two. Plus, a lot of these other animals shouldn't be bred in the first place, so their life isn't really what we're discussing. It's, not breeding them. So. And
also, we've actually learned to like the taste of food, haven't we? I think it's not that you might even be inherently born with a kind of a love of that certain taste. I think we're taught and to love things, and people often say, and I can't remember because I haven't consumed meat in a very, very long time, but people say that it's not really the meat that is flavoursome, it's all the seasoning and the sauce and whatever you're having with it. So it does make you wonder, do people really actually love their meat?
Yeah, kind of the whole question, are we all vegan from birth and taught to do something else?
I was one of those people that claim that they love their meat. I used to love it very much until the moment I realized that this meat was someone else. And at that moment, it didn't matter to me, taste or convenience or anything. But I was one of those people.
Mm.
As long as you don't see the individual, you can say whatever. You need to see the individual.
Mm. I always say, and I know it's a bit controversial, but I always say if you put that sentiment into a human rights context, you'll be absolutely appalled by it. And so, loving something answers no moral questions whatsoever. And you can accept that some people like the taste of meat and the chewiness and all the rest of it, all the things that the vegan burgers are trying to recreate, if you like. And you can accept that, but the fact that you love that doesn't answer a single moral question at all. Your mum wants us to explain moral patience, Jeremy.
Well, just real quickly, just to echo that point, I think that it all comes down to the claims making, because I think a misstep that we can make as a movement sometimes is saying, what do you value more, versus actually clarifying their independent questions. They have nothing to do with one another. The level of enjoyment we get from a rights violation has nothing to do with the fact that it is a rights violation. But yeah, I think, well, we normally have the show pegged for an hour. We could probably talk for another hour about the whole moral patient versus moral agent thing. It goes in, it's quite at length in the Case for Animal Rights, which is a 400-page text that kind of unpacks it from multiple angles. I mean, the simplest answer is not such a simple answer, because I think Reagan frames humans, for instance, as having moral agency and other animals being moral patients. However, there is a lot of nuances to that as far as some humans potentially being moral patients. Personally, I've moved away from it, and I think there's a lot of fantastic lessons I've learned from Reagan for my advocacy. However, I've moved away from this whole idea that we have agency and other animals don't, because I do think it has speciesist undertones. And I don't think there's any way we have any way of knowing another individual's sense of morality. And I think when we impose our view of the world onto them, that's exactly what we're doing. And I don't think it's necessarily make the case for animal rights. So I'd love to hear what anybody else has to say on that, though. I've probably just done a 30,000-foot overview.
No, I do. I really like what you said about, not assuming, because I think that's what gets us into all this trouble in the first place, is the assumptions that we make about other beings and individuals, and I think you only have to look back in different philosophers, assuming that other animals are just machines with just reactions and no feeling and no sentience. Then obviously eventually science catches up and says, well, actually, no, that's not true. But the more we assume, the more trouble we get ourselves into. So, yeah, while I understand, because people get into this whole argument of, well, like the saber-toothed tiger thing, should we take revenge on other animals who are doing this to us, or should they have no obligations to us, but we have obligations to them? It basically comes down to that, doesn't it? So I kind of agree with that side of it, in that we shouldn't expect them to have the same moral obligations to us that we do to them. But then I also do agree that we shouldn't just put assumption that they have no moral kind of take within their own value systems and lives and groups and societies that they have themselves, if that makes sense. Some kind of
I kind of briefed over just a simple distinction, though, which is basically moral agents are the moral decision makers, and moral patients are the receivers of those moral decisions, which is probably important to frame it.
Yeah, the easiest way to talk about moral patients is to talk about moral agents, about people who can understand ethics and be able to act on their understanding of them, versus those who are suggested cannot. But I mean, Subsidies talked about how other animals have a proto-morality, and so there isn't this divide, this real cut off, because obviously you've got the marginal human cases, and you've also got the evidence that there are quite a lot of moral things going on in the non-human world. To that extent, Human Love Solidarity said that Earthling Ed made a video about an animal farm, and I saw that yesterday. Funny enough, but I'm not convinced by it, in the sense that it's a cultural thing. So the idea that dog meat farm would not be acceptable, but that is only in certain cultures. If we were born into a culture where dogs were regarded as food animals and pigs were regarded as animal companions, then it would be perfectly acceptable. I'm not quite sure if it works. And even the definition that we had a little comment earlier, I'm not quite sure it quite does the amount of work that we think it does. I'm not quite sure about that. I'm not convinced about it at all.
And tying it back to the earlier discussion around moral versus legal rights, it's currently legal to eat a dog's flesh in the UK. So it really is that moral necessity versus the legal necessity that I think we need to focus on.
It's legal to kill a dog. I mean, you can kill a dog.
As long as there's not someone's property that gets upset by it. It's indirect duties through a human. That's the only time it kicks in, eh?
Yeah, so long as you own the dog, and also you don't cause unnecessary suffering, you're quite able to do that. See, the thing,
like dog fighting, for instance, being illegal, but like you say, yeah.
Yeah, because that's where the suffering bit comes in. In this definition that's on the screen now, I don't think culturally they are inconsistent thoughts. They're just thoughts about the different categories of other animals in society. And we're socialized into a society where certain other animals are used for certain things and other ones are used for other things. Others, on top of that, are then regarded as free living beings, but they can be used for shooting and hunting and that kind of stuff. And then you've got others who are regarded as so-called vermin. So we make categories out of these, but I don't think it's inconsistent. I think it's just part and parcel of the culture of speciesism.
I think this, to me, is a word that's chucked around a lot within the movement, and I think it's a bit unjustly so, because to me, the key for this is that it's inconsistent, and to your point, culturally, but I think also at an individual level, there are people out there that aren't bothered by animal use. So it's really not cognitive dissonance for them to support animal use if they're not bothered by it. I think so. It doesn't apply to everyone. It really is if someone is bothered by it, but then continues to support it. That's when I think that word kicks in.
Terry is saying you can't buy or sell dog meat. Interesting that. I mean,
we'll have to research that one. We can have an update next week, maybe.
Yeah. And speaking of updates, we ought to move to our update, I think, because we're out of time, really. So,
should we just plow through a couple of these comments real quick? Because I think there's some goodies. I think. Okay. We've already ticked over the hour mark. We try to hit it before the hour because we figure the 3 digits is more intimidating for people to watch it back, but we're already there, so might as well embrace it for 5 minutes. But my mom's pointed out that I think with language in general, I think it's good to mix things up. So this is another case for me against saying love too much, because it's just chucked around so much, it's kind of lost a bit of its meaning. But if we start talking about respect and justice, that's probably words that other, non-vegans haven't heard that often in relation to our fellow animals. So it might get them thinking more. And this is just a fantastic story of moral agency within other animals. Talking about wolf packs that help weak or disabled wolves. I've spent a lot of time looking at videos online of other animals, and I've seen some really compelling stories similar to these that have completely taken that on its head. So
there's a more interesting version of this, though, because behaviorists would say this is just to do with perpetuating the species, and so they're kind of like triggered to protect their own. But there are plenty of instances where other animals will protect animals of other species,
including humans.
Yeah, and so I mean, like, there's loads and loads of cases of dolphins saving humans from sharks, for example. I mean, there was one where this guy was saying, we were swimming, and then these dolphins came and surrounded us, and we were trying to get back to the shore, and they wouldn't let us get back, and we started to get angry with the dolphins until we realized that outside of the dolphins, who were like swimming in a circle, there were some more dolphins redirecting sharks away from them. So it was like a rescue. It was an absolute rescue attempt, and then as soon as the sharks were at a safe distance, the dolphins released them. It was an amazing story.
Yeah, that's incredible. But then it's only incredible because we underestimate so much, the exceptionality of other animals. And actually that's what I think we should be putting into our advocacy as well, is how exceptional they are in their own right. And it's not all about, but we're superior and we can do this and we can do that and we can fly to the moon and we've invented it. It's like taking away that criteria and showing other animals as individuals, but also within their own species and their own evolution of how they've adapted them and what amazing and incredible things they're capable of, and their own exceptionality.
We can fly to the moon, but we can't keep foxes away from chickens. Go figure that. This one from Deb is interesting because I did a podcast with Mark Beekoff, and he's a cognitive ethologist, and his work is pretty interesting, as is cognitive ethology. And really what you're getting from that discipline, which is relatively new historically, is the fact that other animals have got so much more potential than we ever thought. And I always say that most of the knowledge that humans ever had about other animals was how to exploit them. And then once you start to look at gaining knowledge which is not based on exploitation, be it kind of, I don't know, even down to David Attenborough, I suppose, but certainly cognitive ethology, you start to learn things that you would never have thought, because we've never asked those questions before, and we'd never really looked at them in their own, in their own way, if you like, in their own lights. We've always looked at them in terms of, instrumentally. And as soon as you look at them without instrumental eyes, you see wonderful things then. Jeremy's gone silent. We've lost your audio, Jeremy.
All right, here we are. But yeah, this comment's just around the whole hierarchy thing, which maybe we can unpack in future episodes, because I think there's a lot to unpack around the whole systems and change that perpetuate speciesism. And back to the legal relationship, talking about dog hair being used as well and being mislabeled. I think it's another example where things can skirt underneath. But I think just the last couple of comments here is around underestimating animals' morality, and the sense of moral compass is definitely quite widespread. I think we've evidenced that, and I think that evidence it's one of the ways we can objectify and use them, and create them as lesser than. But I think Elliot's point really speaks to me here, is that assuming that we're not sure if someone else is sentient or experiences life and all these things that would give them a valid claim to basic moral rights. Saying, well, we're not sure, so we're not going to make a decision that would potentially infringe on their rights. I think that's kind of what the rights base says. It doesn't say other animals definitely have these experiences. It just kind of says hey, what if?
That's one of those philosophical games, isn't it? Because we can't prove to each other that we're sentient, for example, because there were ways of casting doubt on that. And Michelle Lowe did a video, I think it might have been yesterday, and she was very critical of Peter Singer, because Peter Singer said that he wouldn't have an objection to eating clams and maybe oysters because he doesn't think they're sentient. And again, it's a question of, I mean, Michelle said it herself, how do you know?
Mm.
And of
That
course,
questionable sentience is, I think, quite a good term.
Yeah, well, the animal rights position is kind of, well, you give them the benefit of the doubt, and we've been doing that for years, and that's what you should do.
Yeah.
With that, I don't know if you're able to play. We have a fantastic clip that kind of tie in with last week's subject of a really I don't know. When did you actually want to introduce it a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So last week we had Mel Broughton on the show, and we were talking about violence towards activists. And obviously, Mel, if anyone doesn't know the story, Mel was recently attacked at a Hunt Sab event, and he was quite seriously injured. So he's just recovering from his injuries. If you're watching this, Mel, wishing you well. And he was speaking a lot about, the hunt sabbing and attacks and violence. And we showed a clip of a lot of those kind of attacks and violence and threats that Sabs kind of experience. But but towards the end of that, of Mel's kind of talk, he said, there are a lot of wins. We do actually save a lot of foxes, and we have a lot of success at these events as well. And we were thinking as a show, it would be good to show some of that in balance, rather than just showing all the negative and the difficulties that Sabs face, also the amazing job that they're doing out there as well. So this is kind of just to balance out the whole negative side and to show some of the positive wins as well.
And are we going to come back and say goodbye at the end, or are we just going to shut the show down at the end of this, Jeremy? What are you going to do?
Any words of wisdom you have, I'd say them now. There's no time like the present. Carpe diem.
No, I'm just going to say we just watch the film and then come back and say goodbye. I don't know. It's up to
All right, we'll do that.
Let's do it now. Right.
Sounds good. We'll see everyone next week.
Yes. 1, 2, 3, 4.
You would say that.
I would. I'm a caring person, you see.
You're at Fox Hunt. You're not a caring person at all. You're not a caring person at all. Why are you at Fox Hunt then?
Management of the countryside.
Is that what you call ripping animals apart?
Yeah.
Is it? Okay, brilliant.
So would you rather me shoot?
I thought you lot hunt trails, not foxes. Look at your face.
Don't really bother me, mate.
No, I know it doesn't bother you. It doesn't bother any of you if you hunt foxes and kill them. That's what you do. You're a fox hunt. So don't try and pretend that you lay trails, because you don't.
We do though. We've got a gentleman with trails.
Spray now. Sab, get up that road and spray.
Well, I don't know.
Can you call that in? We need to. We've got a pair of foxes here. Oh, beautiful souls. Dismantled in full cry. I repeat, full cry. The group's needed up here immediately, please. That sounds good. Where are your hounds going, Mr. Bird of Prey? In the complete opposite direction, which tells me you are not hunting within the law. Leave it! Leave it! Leave it! Leave it! You are not hunting within the law. He's hunting the board. Okay. You leave it! You take him off that line, Chris. And you, Mr. Whipperin, take him off that line. You leave it! You leave it! Hey, 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 hey! Hey, 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 hey! Hey, 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 hey! That's it, back to him! Back to him, back to him! Well done, Hans, well done! Yeah, back to him! Yeah, back to him! Why would you hunt them on if you were on a trail? If you were on a trail, Chris, no need to hunt them on. You're as blatant as anything. Leave it. Hey, hey, ho. Hey, ho, ho, ho. We've got the pack with us. Come here. Leave it! Heads up!